Indiana on the board. Reiner got a piece. Jordan Canada, one of the quickest players in the league, going coast to coast and laying it in. Well,
in a shocking and devastating twist that has shaken the WNBA community and left Indiana Fever fans heartbroken, star player Sophie Cunningham suffered a serious and deeply concerning injury during the Fever's high-stakes showdown against the Connecticut Sun, a matchup that many had already predicted could turn ugly due to the increasingly hostile and physically aggressive nature of recent games between these two franchises. And unfortunately, those fears turned into a painful reality, as Cunningham went down in agony following a dangerous and controversial collision with Connecticut's veteran guard Bria Hartley, whose on-court action has sparked furious debate, outrage, and demands for accountability across social media and mainstream sports coverage. Because on replay and from multiple eyewitness accounts, it appeared that Hartley extended her leg deliberately and recklessly into Cunningham's path during a scramble for the ball, causing Sophie to twist and collapse in a way that suggested more than just accidental contact but rather an intentional move that many fans, analysts, and even former players are calling dirty, mean-spirited, and symptomatic of a league that has allowed unchecked physicality to cross into unsafe territory. And the aftermath has been nothing short of explosive, as Cunningham's family, who have always been vocal and fiercely protective of Sophie's career, immediately went public with their frustrations and fury, with her mother in particular launching into a scathing criticism of not only Hartley but also of the WNBA's broader failure to safeguard its athletes, describing Hartley as a disgruntled and problematic player who has had issues everywhere she has played, accusing her of having a pattern of reckless behavior, and blasting the league for not stepping in sooner to prevent such incidents. While Sophie's sister echoed the sentiments, calling for a total overhaul of officiating standards, and demanding that referees stop turning a blind eye to actions that endanger players' careers. And this very public condemnation by the Cunningham family has poured gasoline on an already raging firestorm surrounding the WNBA's handling of player safety. Because this is not an isolated case but part of a growing and troubling trend that has been noticed by fans and insiders alike, particularly whenever the Indiana Fever and Connecticut Sun square off, as injuries in these games seem far too frequent to be brushed aside as coincidence, with Fever players time and again taking the brunt of overly physical, borderline unsportsmanlike plays that leave fans and teammates fearing for their well-being. And the current outrage is not only about Sophie Cunningham's tragic injury, but also about what it symbolizes: a systemic failure of leadership at the league level, where Commissioner Kathy Engelbert is now being called upon more urgently than ever to step in decisively, establish stronger safety protocols, enforce stricter punishments for deliberate or reckless fouls, and implement a consistent standard of officiating that prioritizes the health and careers of the athletes over the league's PR campaigns and surface-level promotional efforts. Because the truth is, fans are not blind. They see a pattern of repeated dangerous plays. They see stars being targeted. They see referees missing calls that could change the outcomes of games. And they see a commissioner who too often speaks about growth, branding, and expansion while failing to address the core issue of whether her players feel truly protected on the court. And for Fever fans in particular, this incident is an unbearable reminder of the risks their team seems disproportionately exposed to, as many have already taken to social media to declare that, whenever Indiana faces Connecticut, they brace themselves not just for a competitive game but for the possibility of another injury crisis, a narrative that is quickly spiraling out of the league's control. And the conversation has spread beyond the Fever's loyal base into wider basketball circles, where commentators are openly questioning if the WNBA is doing enough to prevent its product from being tainted by accusations of dirtiness, favoritism, and incompetence, with some even warning that if incidents like this continue unchecked, they could damage the credibility of the league at a time when it is striving desperately to prove itself on a larger stage. And, as Sophie Cunningham's recovery timeline remains uncertain, the anger from her supporters grows louder, with fans demanding not only answers but also justice, whether through fines, suspensions, or long overdue structural reforms that make reckless plays, like Hartley's, not just frowned upon but severely punished to set a clear example. Because this is about more than one injury. It is about the culture of accountability, respect, and safety in professional women's basketball. And many feel that unless Engelbert and league officials finally acknowledge and confront this pattern of negligence, the risk of more careers being jeopardized will continue to loom large. leaving behind a trail of broken players, disillusioned fans, and a reputation for a league that talks about empowerment while failing to empower its own stars to play the game they love without fear of malicious injury. And now, as debate rages on across ESPN panels, fan podcasts, Twitter threads, and courtside discussions, Sophie Cunningham's painful fall has become a flashpoint, a rallying cry for change, and perhaps the final straw that forces the WNBA to look in the mirror and decide whether it will continue allowing reckless behavior to masquerade as competition or finally draw a line in the sand to protect the very athletes. Sophie Cunningham has quickly become one of the league's most impactful and popular players, not just for her fiery energy, clutch shooting, and leadership on the court, but also for the way she has stepped up significantly in the absence of superstar rookie Caitlin Clark, whose injury and sidelining had already left the Indiana Fever scrambling to find consistency, momentum, and balance, and Sophie filled that void with determination and grit, becoming both the heartbeat of the team and a player fans could rally behind during difficult stretches of the season. But now, with her own devastating injury suffered in a controversial matchup against the Connecticut Sun, the Fever find themselves in a precarious position that extends far beyond one lost game. It's a strategic nightmare for head coach Stephanie White, who has already been dealing with a roster riddled by injuries, nagging health concerns, and departures, leaving her with the daunting task of reshuffling rotations, finding offensive production, and maintaining defensive intensity in a league where the margin for error is razor thin and the competition has only grown fiercer. And this setback could not have come at a worse time, as the Fever were beginning to build chemistry and string together performances that suggested a turning point. But Sophie's injury now leaves a glaring hole in scoring, leadership, and toughness, which has fueled widespread frustration among Fever fans and heightened concerns about whether the league is doing enough to protect its athletes from reckless and dangerous plays, like the one that sidelined her. Because for the Fever community, this is more than just basketball. It's about watching their stars repeatedly become targets in games that have developed reputations for being overly physical and poorly officiated, and the overwhelming response from fans across Indiana and beyond has been a mix of heartbreak, outrage, and support, with thousands flooding social media platforms to send messages of encouragement, prayers for Sophie's recovery, and passionate demands for the WNBA to finally take action, enforce stricter penalties, and hold players accountable when their conduct crosses the line from competitive to dangerous. And this moment has sparked a larger, much-needed conversation across the BASKETBALL world about officiating standards, consistency of rule enforcement, and the league's responsibility to safeguard the health and careers of its stars. Because Sophie Cunningham's injury, while shocking in the moment, is sadly part of a larger pattern that critics and analysts have been pointing to for years: the WNBA's tendency to downplay or dismiss safety concerns in favor of keeping games intense and entertaining, even when that intensity comes at the cost of player well-being. And as more voices join the call for reform, the urgency is impossible to ignore, with analysts on ESPN, former players on podcasts, and fans in comment sections all echoing the same demand. This cannot continue, because the players are not disposable. They are the very foundation of the league's growth. And when stars like Sophie Cunningham, who has become a fan favorite and essential piece of the Fever's rebuilding process, are sidelined by preventable incidents, it undermines not only the team's season but the credibility of the league itself. And for Stephanie White, the challenge now becomes finding ways to keep the Fever competitive with key contributors missing, a task that feels nearly impossible when each week brings a new injury report and each game feels like a survival battle rather than a contest of basketball skill. And while she will undoubtedly look to her remaining core to step up, there is no replacing the impact Sophie has had both statistically and emotionally for this young squad, which makes this injury even more devastating. But perhaps what stands out most is the way this incident has galvanized the Fever community, who are once again showing why Indiana remains one of the most passionate basketball states in the nation, as fans have rallied behind Sophie with unwavering loyalty, filling timelines with heartfelt words, rallying cries, and frustration toward the league's lack of protective measures, proving once again that Fever Nation is a family that does not abandon its stars when adversity strikes. And now the question looms: will the WNBA finally respond to this growing crisis, or will it continue to deflect, delay, and downplay until more careers are derailed? Because if history has taught us anything, it's that momentum for change only comes when enough voices demand it, and right now, those voices are deafening. Urging Commissioner Kathy Engelbert and league officials to recognize that the time for empty statements has passed. The time for action is now. And that means investing in better officiating, instituting harsher penalties for reckless fouls, and putting the health and safety of players above PR narratives, branding strategies, or marketing slogans. Because if the WNBA truly wants to grow into the global force it aspires to be, it cannot afford the reputation of being a league that fails to protect its own athletes. And Sophie Cunningham's injury is a sobering reminder that the stakes are not abstract, they are deeply human, involving careers, futures, and lives. And unless systemic changes are made swiftly, the same cycle of injury, outrage, and inaction will continue to play out, leaving behind fans who feel betrayed, athletes who feel unprotected, and a league that claims empowerment while failing to empower the very women who give everything on the court, which is why all eyes will remain fixed on how the WNBA responds in the coming days. Because this is not just another sports headline but a turning point in the ongoing fight for fairness, safety, and respect in professional women's basketball. And as we await updates on Sophie Cunningham's condition, the collective hope is that her recovery will be swift, her return inevitable, and that her pain will not be in vain but instead serve as the catalyst that finally forces those in power to do what should have been done long ago. Protect the players, protect the game, and protect the future. Protect the future. The shocking injury to Sophie Cunningham could not have come at a worse time for the Indiana Fever, who were already grappling with the absence of their brightest star, Caitlin Clark, and the constant uncertainty of a roster plagued by health concerns. And what makes this latest incident even more painful is the fact that Sophie had not only been filling a vital statistical role but also becoming a symbol of resilience, fire, and leadership at a time when the Fever desperately needed stability. And yet, instead of the league celebrating her rise and the team's fight to stay competitive, fans are once again forced to witness the dark side of WNBA competition: reckless plays, inconsistent officiating, and a disturbing pattern of unsafe clashes in games against the Connecticut Sun, which have now developed an almost notorious reputation for leaving Fever players battered, bruised, and in some cases sidelined for weeks, fueling the perception that Indiana has become a target, and that the league's officials are either unwilling